Classic WoW is not quite like modern day WoW. In Classic, everyone must come to raid remembering that you cannot simply just use any ability on a boss. The amount of debuffs anything can have is limited to only 16. Bearing this in mind, it is imperative to only use the best debuffs. This can either mean damage increasing debuffs or debuffs that make the mob easier to handle. Let's start off by talking about damage increasing debuffs. Specifically, physical damage increasing debuffs. Before listing off what debuffs benefit physical damage DPS, let us first understand how exactly armor works. In Classic WoW, armor has a logarithmic curve. What this means is that the more armor that someone gets, the less of an impact each point of armor gives that player. And vice versa for reducing armor. The more armor penetration there is on a target, the better that armor penetration gets, unless the target reaches 0 armor, of course. First of the armor reducing debuffs is Sunder Armor, which costs 15 rage and is an ability that warriors can use. This ability sunders the target's armor, reducing it by 450 per Sunder Armor, and causes a high amount of threat, applying up to 5 times. Or, instead of Sunder Armor, a rogue can use the ability Expose Armor, while talented into 2 out of 2 improved Expose Armor in the Assassination tree. Second is Fairy Fire, an ability that any druid can use no matter what spec that they are. This ability is instant and decreases the armor of the target by 505 for 40 seconds. Third is Curse of Recklessness. This curses the target with Recklessness, increasing the melee attack power of the target by 90, but reducing the armor by 640 for 2 minutes. Typically, this is always used on any target that is not extremely threatening to your tank, because the armor penetration you gain is massive for any melee DPS. Fourth is Annihilator Axe. This is a craftable axe that any warrior can get. This axe can be quite costly, but is extremely important to have, especially on multiple warriors. It has a chance on hit to reduce an enemy's armor by 200, stacking up to 3 times. The chance to apply this debuff is quite small, so having this on multiple characters and using it at the beginning of a fight to get 3 stacks up immediately is very important. These are all of the possible armor reducing debuffs a raid is able to use. There are more items out there that reduce armor, such as Crystal Yield from Unguro or Riven Spike, but these don't stack with Sunder Armor or Expose Armor, making them not as useful. Hunter's Mark is very strong though to use early on in Classic WoW. Early into raiding, hunters do a lot of damage, especially if they have the right pet. Using Hunter's Mark early game is great, while the raid group still uses several hunters. The last of the physical damage increasing debuffs is actually just a consumable. If your raid group is heavily stacking up melee DPS, then having your tanks use Gift of Arthas is deceivingly good. Gift of Arthas increases the resistance to shadow by 10, and if an enemy strikes the person who drank this potion, the attacker has a 30% chance of being afflicted with a disease that increases their damage taken by 8 for 3 minutes. Now, 8 more damage doesn't really sound like a lot, but that's why I said this is deceivingly good. Any sort of white hit is going to proc Gift of Arthas. This means every single auto attack, every single time a rogue gets an extra hit from their sword mastery, anytime a melee gets an extra hit because of Wind Fury, or if you have Hand of Justice and your Hand of Justice procs for an extra attack. These will all trigger Gift of Arthas. Since we've already talked about physical damage increasing debuffs, now let's talk about spell damage increasing debuffs. Most spell damage debuffs are simply flat percent damage increase. But similarly to how physical DPS have to deal with armor, spellcasters have to deal with resistances. Primarily spellcasters that use binary spells, such as Shadow Bolt or Fireball. Here's a chart to explain a little bit how resistances work and how penetration helps you do more damage. The primary way that caster DPS deal with these resistances is through Warlock curses, such as Curse of Elements and Curse of Shadows. Curse of Elements reduces the fire and frost resistance by 75, and increases the fire and frost damage that the target takes by 10%. Curse of Shadows is similar. Curse of Shadows reduces shadow and arcane resistance by 75, and increases the damage done to the target by shadow and arcane spells by 10%. This sort of flat percent damage increase can also be found in Improved Shadow Bolt in the Warlock Destruction tree. Improved Shadow Bolt debuff says that every time your Shadow Bolt gets a critical strike, it increases the damage dealt to the target by 20% until 4 non-periodic sources of damage are applied, and for shadow damage only. This means that anytime a Warlock uses Shadow Burn or Shadow Bolt, or even a Shadow Priest uses Mind Blast, their spell will do 20% more damage and consume one of the 4 stacks. Second is Shadow Weaving, a Shadow Priest talent. Shadow Weaving applies a debuff to the target, increasing the shadow damage they take by 3%, stacking up to 5 times, meaning they take 15% more shadow damage. Third is another weapon, which is Nightfall. Nightfall is a 2-handed axe that you can buy the recipe for when you have Exalted with a Thorium Brotherhood. This axe has a chance on hit to increase the spell damage taken by the target by 15% for 5 seconds. The last of the percent damage increasing debuffs is Improved Scorch. Improved Scorch says that your Scorch spells have a 100% chance to cause the target to be vulnerable to fire damage. This vulnerability increases the fire damage dealt to the target by 3% for 30 seconds, stacking up to 5 times, so 15%, kinda like Shadow Weaving. There are a few other debuffs that are good for spellcasters in addition to these percent damage increasing debuffs. The first of these is Arcanite Dragonling from any engineers in the raid. Arcanite Dragonling can apply 5 stacks of Flame Buffet. Flame Buffet increases the fire damage taken by the target by 40, and when stacked up to 5 times, increases the fire damage taken by 200, which is very useful for when mages can spec into fire. However, when mages are frost spec, the raid will be bringing 1 mage spec'd into Winter's Chill. Winter's Chill gives your frost damage spells a 100% chance to apply the Winter's Chill effect, which increases the chance for any frost spell to get a critical hit by 2% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 5 times, meaning that any frost mage in the raid, including the Winter's Chill mage, will have a 10% increased chance to crit on any target that has this stacked up on it. Any other leftover debuff slots can typically be assigned to Corruption for your Warlocks, as this is usually one of the highest DPSing debuffs outside of the ones that buff your raid. Since we've talked about damage increasing debuffs, now let's talk about supporting debuffs. Not all debuffs are used purely to make the boss die faster. Some bosses do a lot of damage and need supporting debuffs to either make the boss not hit as hard or heal people when they hit the boss. Typically, damage-reducing debuffs that a raid might use on a hard-hitting boss include Demoralizing Shout from a warrior. This reduces the melee attack power of all enemies within 10 yards by 140 for 30 seconds, making the enemies not hit as hard. Second is Thunderclap. Thunderclap is an ability used by warriors that blasts nearby enemies with thunder, increasing the time between their attacks by 10% for 30 seconds. Or, instead of Thunderclap, if you guys are really lucky, you can use Thunder Fury. Did somebody say Thunder Fury? Thunder Fury has a chance on hit to not only deal nature damage to the enemy, but also slow the attack speed of the target by 20% for 12 seconds, making it 10% better than Thunderclap. Third is Curse of Weakness, another curse from Warlocks. This curse reduces the damage caused by a target by 31 for 2 minutes. On the Alliance side, Paladins are able to apply debuffs to a target which can give either health or mana to anyone attacking the target. These spells are known as Seal of Light and Seal of Wisdom. Seal of Light is typically used on a boss where your melee and or raid members are under heavy damage. Seal of Wisdom, however, would normally be used on a very long duration fight, helping your casters and healers not run out of mana. For my final thoughts on debuff management, to have a great performing raid, each debuff slot will have to be carefully thought about. One debuff list can be totally different on one boss than it is on another boss. Some bosses that do not do a lot of damage can skip out on using a lot of the supporting debuffs in favor for using more damaging debuffs. Some bosses that are extremely threatening require the raid to scale back a little bit on the damaging debuffs and trade it in for more supportive debuffs like Seal of Light, Curse of Weakness, and so on. Managing debuffs is one of the pieces to the puzzle towards having a high-scale raid environment. Well, that's it for this video, you guys. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to see more, Go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to follow my channel and see all new content the moment it's released. Otherwise, if you have any questions for me or just want to contact me for any reason, please feel free to join my Discord and ask me anything you'd like. I'll leave a link to my Discord in the description down below. But most importantly, keep the classic WoW hype alive!